Hey Jason, how's it going?
Just enjoying lockdown life here in BC.
Oh yeah, tons of
It's
fun.
the,
Yeah.
might be the only time in my life. No, this isn't nice. I was going to say something at the expense of Saskatchewan, but I love Saskatchewan. There's no point. Like, why would I do that? That's not
Oh yeah.
nice.
I mean, you guys have like mountains and oceans and whatever, and we've got fields. But I mean, other than that, like, I don't know. It's okay here.
My favorite childhood vacation was a road trip with my family to Saskatchewan.
Really?
Yeah, it's my favorite because we had like my dad has like cousins. So I don't know what that makes for me, like second aunts twice removed. I don't know how that all works, but like, second cousins or whatever. And out there, and they had just farms. And as a kid, I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world, like getting to see and be on the property. And yeah, it was just amazing. It was just such a good trip. And I remember we were camping in, I know this is what you brought me on to talk about, I know. Today. I remember camping like somewhere in Saskatchewan and it started to hail, and the hail was the size of like, I just remember them looking like bigger than corn pops.
Yeah.
And that was my reference point. So they weren't quite golf balls, but they were bigger than corn pops. And it was the coolest thing in the world.
Oh man. Yeah. Yeah, that happens occasionally. It's not always fun if your car's out there, but it's pretty amazing. So I was introduced to you as a youth, make you feel old. When you guys were first doing Youth Alpha, I was in youth group, and that's when I first had my experience with you. And then since then, it seems like you've just kept popping up in my life in different ways.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No, it's good. I love your voice and the things you've been doing, because I've seen you at Youthquake, at Briarcrest, and then as I got more involved with youth ministry here in Saskatoon, my church helps host the youth conference that you're often a part of.
Conference, yeah.
Yeah, and so we've ran into each other there, and then it just seems like we keep running into each other. And then you planted a church that I'm a huge fan of, because I just got into Daryl Johnson before you guys planted, and he's one of the people who speak at your church. Yeah. And so I've been just soaking it up. I've been loving it. But for those who don't know who you are, can you just give like a little intro to who you are, what you do, and what life's been like for you lately?
Sure. So I live in Vancouver with my wife and our three kids, Hudson, Mary, and Millie. They're 7, 5, and 3. Today, Hudson is doing his first I don't know when you did your first public speaking thing.
Oh,
so
yeah.
He's doing his public speaking, and it's like a book report. And so we were at home practicing this morning for his thing, which is so cute. So yeah, that's a big part of my life, is family there. And we moved to Vancouver to plant a church. We moved here almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. And in the middle of the school year, and our life really changed because all of a sudden we weren't driving very much. Our office is walking distance from our house. Hudson and Mary's school is walking distance, and Millie's preschool is walking distance, grocery store is walking distance. So our life has really changed. And so we live in a part of Vancouver called Fairview, and we just love it. We feel so thankful to be in this city, and we feel really called here. And it's been a cool experience to feel that. It's the first time in my life since high school that I felt so called to a place. In high school, I just felt so called as a young Christian to be in my school. I was like, I was a student in high school, but I knew I was there to like represent Jesus. And I feel that same sort of sense of like new reality in my life of God being like, I put you here. And there's no stress with it. There's just a sense of like purpose and intent. And but then we decided to plant a church with some friends, which is a cool story. And we decided like years ago to launch in September 2020, having no idea that we'd be in the middle of a global pandemic. And so as a church, we've never met in person, but we built the launch team online, and then we launched youth ministry, kids ministry, small groups, Alpha, Sunday mornings, all online. And it's just been an amazing, I guess 8 months or whatever it is now. What month is it? September, October, November, December, January, February, March, April. Yeah, 8 months, dude. So it's been amazing. And
that's crazy.
So thankful for what God's doing. So that's a bit of my world. Outside of my work with the local church in Vancouver, I feel really called to serve and support church leaders across Canada. So my friends and I have a network called the Canadian Church Leaders Network. It's really just trying to support and encourage young pastors. And so we do a podcast called the Canadian Church Leaders Podcast, interview people every week, and get to work with guys like Daryl to put resources out. But really, we're having a ton of fun. I've never felt like more challenged because of the nature of the pandemic, but more inspired in my work than I do right now.
No, that's so good. And I've really appreciated your voice, especially recently with your own podcast that you're a part of and hosting that, and the stuff you guys do as a church, and how you equipped youth leaders too, where you guys have that podcast as well, and those conferences. Like, you've been a huge help to me and a bunch of other pastors I know. So I just want to thank you for that. You've been massive help. Oh,
that's really encouraging. It's really encouraging. Thanks for saying that.
But in addition to that, you joined in with a bunch of other people in coming out with a book recently. I think it's been like a year-ish or maybe 2 years that this came out, called Everyday Apologetics. And I found that book really, really helpful and practical, where it was because often with this whole idea of apologetics, which is just like arguments or explanations for like Christianity and why we think it's true, it can often get very like heady, and like if you're not a scholar, you can sit around and be like, oh my gosh, like I'm just going to sleep. But this one I found to be really practical. Like, it could be a book that I could just hand to someone, like even just a youth, and be like, hey, you got questions? Like, this book can help you wrestle with some of those. And the one you tackled is the one I want to talk about with you today, is the whole idea of Jesus being exclusive. Because I've heard this be a struggle in my own ministry, but even with other people, and even non-Christians, where it seems like this whole idea of Jesus being the only way, the truth, the life, the one God, is often, especially in Canada, it's not a very Canadian or progressive, normal way of thinking, where we're like, oh, it seems so like exclusive and not inviting. And so I want to ask you, like, when it comes to Jesus and the exclusive claims that Christianity believes about Jesus, why do you think that people in Canada and in the rest of the world seem to be more and more uncomfortable with these exclusive claims that Jesus, it seems to bother us more than maybe it did 100 or 500 years ago? For sure.
It for sure did. It for sure does. I think let me just say a couple of things first. One is, I am the least qualified person in this like list of authors. Like, so my buddy Chris, who I wrote, or sorry, who really, him and Paul Chamberlain edited and pulled together the book, invited myself and Andy Steiger and Mark Clark and a few others, Barton and John, to like weigh in on it. Chris is like one of my best friends. He's a real he's brilliant. I just think there's no one I think is in Canada right now with a voice as nuanced, as sharp, as informed as Chris. And that's why we planted a church together. Because and then he said, dude, you need to put a chapter in this book. I don't do apologetics. I try to keep it real simple. And part of it though, too, can I just confess something? Yeah. And this isn't noble. It's just who I am. It's because I'm like, I don't want to be argumentative. I don't want to be like, I don't want to stir up conflict. And apologetics is actually really loving and kind, but sometimes can take on that tone of like, hey, it is conflict, and I think that kind of, it's interesting because that sets the tone for the conversation we're having around exclusivity. And what you said is like, at least in Canada, like we just don't like conflict. And some people are way more comfortable than others. Some people thrive on it. Some people like it when it's behind the anonymity of like a social media platform or something like that. Okay, a couple thoughts. First of all, Jesus, he is the most inclusive person socially, full stop. Like, read the Gospels. I wonder if there's people who aren't followers of Jesus listening, some people who are followers of Jesus, some people who are kind of like, I'm on the fence. Read the Gospels, full stop. You'll see someone who's radically inclusive. He found room in his life for people who were constantly marginalized by the religious systems. So Jesus, representing the religious establishment, constantly was a bridge builder to people who didn't feel like they could connect. So if there was someone who was inclusive in social life, Jesus, room. I think about him and Zacchaeus. One of the things that the gospel writers note is that, he asked Zacchaeus to eat food together. Eating food was a symbol of friendship. Zacchaeus was like an outcast in the city because of he was an oppressor to his own people, like in collusion with the Roman government to exploit people for money. And Jesus says, I'm going to eat with you. That's crazy. That's crazy. On the flip side, he's going after those who are oppressed, like the women caught in adultery, prostitutes, sinners. all these people, and he's bringing them to his house too, and having like eating with them. It's just amazing. So inclusive. But his teaching was so radical and exclusive in the sense that he was constantly teaching. Like sometimes people pitch Jesus as someone who was teaching stuff that was like just really like motivational speaker-ish.
Yeah.
And listen, I get it. I get how that's the vibe. Sometimes there's just a lot of people, quote unquote, preach the Bible that sound like motivational speakers. Hopefully I'm not one of them, but maybe I do come off that way. But Jesus definitely didn't fly that way. It seemed as if when he would speak that as many people would leave offended as positively impacted. Because his message, what Jesus wanted to do was change lives with truth. And he wasn't just trying to like get people through the week. He was trying to set them free from lies. And so Jesus was constantly saying radical things against the religious establishment. Where there was corruption, he spoke directly to it. You can't speak to corruption passively. You can't speak to corruption in a quote unquote inclusive way. He was inclusive of even those who were corrupt, but his address to them, and probably the most exclusive claims of Jesus were about himself and him being God revealed and the only pathway to salvation. So he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father except through me.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's so here's what's interesting about Jesus. He's socially inclusive, but his ideas were such that they were exclusive. And we live in a moment where we folded the two, where we folded the idea. Like, so, Aiden, you invited me to this space. I feel welcomed by you. But we live in a moment where, like, if we didn't agree with each other's lifestyles or beliefs, we would probably feel as if you don't like me and that I'm not welcome. Like, we folded that culturally, this idea of, so if someone believes something different than me or has different kind of preferences or ideas or convictions and I disagree with them, they feel that I don't just disagree with their ideas, I disagree with them as a person, and they feel rejected, and vice versa. Even if they just feel like they know that I hold beliefs that are different than them, they feel rejected. So we see that socially. We see why there's great campaigns to try to challenge people towards like a cohesive idea around morality and these different things. And so part of it is surface. Part of it's like we just don't want conflict and those kind of things. But I think part of it is actually around the very fundamental nature of truth and what it means to be accepted. I think we believed a lie that to disagree with somebody is to disagree with the person themselves. To disagree with someone's ideas is to like not accept the person themselves. Acceptance and agreement have become the same. So we need to pull those apart. But the other thing that I think is a mistake is when it comes to religious dialogue, I think we've mistaken the fundamental nature of at least Christian religious truth. And I think actually the majority of religious truth, I think it's really important as we have this conversation. We're not just talking about Christendom. We're talking about, I think, 2/3 of the world would subscribe to some of the world's large religions, and all of them hold exclusive beliefs. And the nature of their beliefs maybe we'll get into this more later, but the nature of their beliefs aren't casual or flippant. The nature of their beliefs are not in the realm of subjectivity, but in the realm of objectivity.
Yeah. And I think that's where the struggle really is with a lot of us is, one, I'm also like you. I'm not a big fan of conflict. And I think that our generation in our current moment is less and less a fan of real conflict. I think we are fans of online conflict that's not face to face. But when we're actually having disagreements, it makes us uncomfortable. And more saying that you have the truth or the answer feels kind of arrogant. And it's the association of, if you don't agree with me, then you must not love me. And we've kind of believed that. But for those who hear that, because I know that there are people who hear the exclusive claims about Jesus, and the exclusive claims that his followers make, that he is the truth, the life, the God, which in turn means that the other gods are not the truth and are not the life. Like, what would you say to someone who's like, that just seems like an arrogant statement? Like, how can you say something like that?
So it's such a good question, man. And I think, so there's a common response, which says, why can't all religions, like, don't all religions just kind of maybe have a piece of the truth? And like, are they all, I think this would be a common sentiment. It's like, as long as you don't push your religious beliefs on me, I'm fine with you having your religious beliefs. And then it's also, and it's all religious beliefs are ultimately the same. They're just people's way of expressing themselves or connecting with the divine. And here's what's interesting about that. Let me just say, most people who would say and believe that are trying to do something positive. I think their intent is to say, like, because we live in a pluralistic society, which means one of the beautiful things that I think is great about Canada, but I worry is actually being threatened in the last year or so more than it is, that we live in a society that celebrates diversity, but not just diversity of skin color, which we do, but also diversity of thought and religious belief. But we do, interestingly, and this is a bit of a tangent, it seems like in the last year, if you don't subscribe to the primary narrative, there's not a lot of tolerance towards you. And that's really sad, because I think we could lose what makes Canada some really special about Canada. So I think that we live in a pluralistic society where there's lots of religious beliefs, where we don't want to have conflict, and we don't like the idea of exclusive truth claims. So we need to say all of these beliefs are sort of true. And there's two problems with that. One, and please, like, hear this, the people that say that often have good intent, but two problems with it. And I hope we can talk about both. First of all, no one actually believes that. Like, no one believes that. Like, no one believes that. Full stop. We can talk about that. And second, it's actually radically offensive to say that. It's more offensive than the exclusive truth claims of Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism or Christianity. Should we talk about both those things?
Yeah, let's do it. Because now I'm curious. What do you mean? Why does no one believe it? Why is it actually more offensive? Because we think that it's not. That it's like, isn't this more loving? Isn't this actually better? Isn't this how we run? But
totally. Let's do each one at a time. So first one, no one actually believes it. So there are religious beliefs that believe that child sacrifice is a means by which to connect with God, or religious extremists who have bombed and killed people because of their religious beliefs were such that in their martyrdom and cleansing of evil people, they will be rewarded with eternity in heaven. Is that what we mean? That's it's all true? No, none of us think that. Like, and bro, I'm not trying to make like a gross point, but there are like some very, very, very dangerous religious beliefs around that mutilate young girls. That sacrifice people, that are deeply inherently racist. Like it's dangerous stuff. And so when we say, this is why I don't think anyone believes that all religions are like in the end true, because it's like, no, like, so then what do you believe? Like, we don't believe that. I don't think anyone that's saying all are true are saying, so then you're saying, oh, not those ones. So then what's the statement? Most? And then the question becomes, what's the criteria to evaluate it? And that's the really important thing, that if somebody listening is like, that question is, what's the criteria to evaluate it? And you follow that thread, and you're going to find yourself going down a very interesting thread that asks you, oh my goodness, we're not in the realm of subjective truth claims anymore. We're in the realm of objective truth claims. What is actually true in this matter?
Yeah. And that's, that illustration is interesting because it's true, especially if you want to dive into what let's just even look at the most popular religions in the world, what we believe. It is so radically different that there is no way that you can say that they're all true. Like, and I think on a surface level, you could say, oh, well, Muslims believe in one God, just like the Christians do. And they have a prophet who came and did some stuff, and that's the guy they follow. And you could be like, oh, there's similarities between that and Christianity. And it's like, yeah, on the surface, it seems like that. But when you really dive into like what we think, like the Quran says that when there's final judgment, that Jesus will stand before Allah and say that the Christians, he never claimed that he was God, and the Christians have no idea what they're talking about. So it's like, it's hard to put that and Christianity together. That and Buddhism is more like there is really no God. It's just that you can become like an enlightened being. From my understanding, it's more what it is. Like it's like these don't really all meshed together. But then I want to kind of dive into that. And this is an off topic question that I kind of want to push back, because I know some people are going to think this is like, you're right. There are religions and religious beliefs out there that are very dangerous, that are racist. We see that a lot in the States with whether
or
you're
like
the
even
KKK.
or ethnic cleansing. Like there's been
Yeah.
genocides and civil wars in the name of religious conviction.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing we do need to chat about, though, is the first idea is like no one actually believes that. I really don't think people really do believe that claim, that all are ultimately the truth. The second one, though, is how it's more offensive than people think.
Mm-hmm.
And you hinted at that. The reason why it's more offensive than people think is because I have friends who are atheists. I have friends who are Muslim, friends who are Buddhist. And we believe things deeply. And so you gave the examples like the difference between, or even a Jewish friend, like a Jewish friend doesn't believe Jesus was the Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
Believe in God, but they don't believe Jesus was the Messiah. The core belief that I hold like so deeply is that Jesus is the Messiah. Or like, let's talk about like a Buddhist and a Muslim. Buddhist, that there isn't God, but we can become enlightened. Or a Muslim person or a Hindu person believes in many gods. When we say ultimately you guys believe the same thing, you know what we're saying? You're saying to all of us, what you believe is actually just, it's not as important as you think it is. And so the intent, and I really want to just assume the best of people, that their intent is to actually try to pull people together. But actually what you're doing is you're positioning yourself as the great authority of truth. And you're saying what I see that none of you see is that you're all just grasping at the same truth. And so you're the enlightened one, and everyone else, and these are people who've given their entire lives to these religious convictions. They're not just side notes. You're saying to 2/3 of the world that what you believe deeply isn't that significant. And ultimately it's the same. And the truth is, and that's, it's offensive, and it's just actually illogical. Like the fundamental nature of truth claims is such that to not believe that God exists, and to believe and shape your whole worldview on God existing, to believe that God is reigning from a distance, or he's actively involved with the affairs of humanity, fundamentally different worldviews. And so you actually can't say they're ultimately the same. Those are exclusive truth claims. You can't say this is an apple and this is an orange. It has to be one or the other. And that's what's happening here. And so we're kind of saying, hey, and that's that. So I just think that I really get what people are after, but it's surprisingly insulting to say to someone who's oriented their whole life around a core belief about God, or there not being a God, or the nature of that God expressed through the scriptures, and to just say, oh, ultimately you guys all believe the same thing.
I know that someone's going to be sitting there thinking though, like, but why are millions of people following these different things and all feeling like they find some form of truth in it? Like, how can it be not the truth if so many people are finding truth in it? Like, doesn't that kind of point that maybe they are all just grasping at something, but none of them fully understand it? Or
it's a
what's
great
going
thought.
on? Why can people find truth in Buddhism and in Christianity and in Judaism and in all kinds of different religions, but it not be like the actual truth?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I don't really know the answer, but I'll just like toss out a couple. I really don't know. I'm going to toss out a couple thoughts, but I do. When we move religious belief out of the realm of just subjectivity, but into the realm of like strong thinking and objective truth, and not that there aren't subjective experiences. That's really important. I'm not every religious experience. Being human is full of subjective experience. I really believe that my relationship with Jesus affects my mind, my body, my emotions, and those things are fully integrated. And so like I can be interacting with a subjective truth, objective truth, like the resurrection, which is like fundamentally an objective truth claim, and have all this subjective experience. On Easter, I had all these experiences of hope in the midst of like pain. So, but as soon as we start actually treating it in that space of like, hey, we're dealing with real ideas, you can begin to actually evaluate one to the other. And what you'll find is that for me as a follower of Jesus, I can acknowledge a ton of good things and similarities in other religious beliefs. Let's just take like some of the movements in our time. Like I think Christianity would critique some of the social justice movement of our time, but it would affirm a ton of it too. Like the creation narrative in Genesis, the life of Jesus was to put deep value in every single person. And so we celebrate that. We believe that God is coming to make all things new. That's the end story that Revelation brings us. So any work on planet Earth, whether it's a Christian or a non-Christian, a Jew or a Hindu, whatever it might be, any work that is towards the end, that's consistent or in harmony with God's kingdom, like there can be a redemptive aspect of it. And so we go around, we celebrate. Like when I'm with people of other faiths, or even people who would say I have no faith, but we find things in common, we celebrate that. So that's first, is that of course there's lots of things. And what do a lot of them share in common between the ones we've been talking about is like grasping for the existential. And I think that's a big question that leads a lot of us down the path of trying to find answers to life's biggest questions, is because why do we hear a beautiful song or see a sunset and almost weep? You know, or why, like when we have kids, does it just like throw us in a loop and ask the big questions about life? It's because we're wired with existential longings. And we're wired, I believe, for Jesus, for a relationship with God. And that wiring, that fundamental wiring, finds expression in every human being. So that's part of it. The second thing is it's incredible what can happen based off of your experiences. Like, I think one of the things that everyone has to wrestle with is how have my own experiences, my upbringing, all these things shape my beliefs and format. Like we've seen, like, just think about the housing boom or let's just think about, what was that, like GameStop or Bitcoin? Yeah. Like people aren't thinking, they're going with the crowd. So we just know that's you can't understate that. So that might be a part of it. So there's existential longing. There might be some truth in different parts of it. I also believe that that the scriptures, the Christian scriptures, present a world where we understand that it's not just the physical that we see. We also see the spiritual. There's also spiritual reality that's affecting our life. So just behind me, past that building, is the city of Vancouver. And when you look at the city of Vancouver, you see buildings, you can go into the building and people are exchanging money and there's good things happening, people making Subway and serving people. There's corrupt things happening. There's sex trafficking. There's police trying to fight sex trafficking, but that's not all that's happening. There are also spiritual forces of evil and the work of God in the city. So spiritual force of evil actually working behind the scenes to see young girls trapped in sex trafficking and coming behind and animating the power of God, coming behind and animating the work of Christians to bring about his kingdom. And so when we interpret the whole world, we have to understand that God is God above all principalities and powers, or lowercase g gods. And so I think that some of the experience that people have with other religious experiences are other spiritual powers that are not as powerful as the living God, who, in the words of Paul in Ephesians, principalities and powers of this dark age, they're dark spiritual forces. And so I don't struggle to even believe that people are, like, see people kind of explore like card reading or psychics, and you go, is that fake? I go, probably a lot of it. Yeah. But I have, the Bible gives a worldview that acknowledges that there are other powers, spiritual powers animating this world outside of the living God. And all of them will be held to account by the living God. And that there will be a day where his kingdom will come in its fullness. But we live in the now, not yet of the kingdom, where Jesus come, announced his kingdom is at hand. But there are other spiritual powers that are at work in our world. And so I think there's a very human element. There's an element of our wiring for the divine. There's this group think element. And I think there's a spiritual element where, and I don't think that's just other religions. Let me be really clear. Yeah. I think that's animating the secular worldview. I think that's one of the biggest myths we're talking about. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is like, oh, we're just talking about the religious world, but anyone who's agnostic or atheist or non-religiously affiliated, this conversation is about them. But it's like, no, that is a worldview. That is a religious belief set. You say, I don't subscribe to any religion. No. Let's like really ask. We've oriented our life around a set of truths that are defining our actions and our rituals in our life. And I think that the secular worldview, it's the only way I can explain the kind of thoughts that are so widespread. I think about the complete acceptance of abortion as a worldview, as a logical conclusion of a worldview. I just go, the only way that makes sense is that there's spiritual powers propping that up, because it's so dark and so evil. And what I'm talking about is the idea of denying that these are human beings being murdered in Canada all the way to full term.
Yeah.
And I realize that what I'm saying right now is probably going to get, I know you've got millions of listeners, and I'm just going to get roasted now for saying this. And I'd like to ask people if it's okay for you, if you heard that and that was offensive, I want you to know that I'm not accepting you. I might just not disagree with your opinion. And what would it be like for you to know that it's possible to love someone and still disagree with what they believe to be true? And that if we can't have those conversations, we're going to have deeply held convictions that are unchecked.
Yeah. And that's super true. And I think it's huge to recognize is that, that's kind of the thing that we're challenging here. Is we're not saying that, that exclusive claims, should just be accepted, where it's like, oh yeah, I exclude you. It's more just like, there are exclusive claims that people believe, and to have those doesn't mean that people are being unloving. It's meaning that you can have a different opinion on this and we can still love each other and be loving. And of course there are things that would make that very hard to do. But I think even in the example you just gave, I think that answers the first question that you talked about, is do people just don't actually believe this? And I think that that's a clear example, is that when you move it away from just religious beliefs and you make it more about politics or whatever, that when you make a claim on either abortion, or let's even do like Black Lives Matter, like all these different things, we know that the whole idea of, oh, that's true for you, but that's just your truth, that's not my truth, like that doesn't actually, no one actually believes that. Like they
and these truths matter. And the point is, like, for every person that's standing up against injustice, and I want to be counted as one of them. And I realize that even saying that, like, I want more and more of my life to be aligned with God's heart for justice, biblical justice, not a justice defined by anyone else, but justice defined by Scripture, biblical justice. I realize that for me, I'm not casual about it. Like, I can't just say they're just subjective claims, because this sometimes this is people's lives are in the balance. This really matters. Yeah. And so it's important, these are important things. And I think that's what I was trying to get at earlier. Like, there's a sense by which the person who says it's all the same is trivializing it. And I think it's important to say also that the person is also placing religious beliefs in the realm of subjective truth. And subjective truth is real. It's not a thing. Like, I always use the example of, like, when my wife and I are driving in the car, I can say I'm hot and she can say she's cold. Yeah. Or I can say it's hot and she can say it's cold, talking about the same environment. And those would, if they were objective claims, like it is 18 degrees. Yeah. So you're right or wrong, right? So if it's 18 degrees on the thermostat and the thermostat is accurate, and I say it's 17 and she says it's 18, I'm wrong, she's right. Objective. If I say I'm hot, she said, or it's hot, and she says it's cold, we're both telling the truth. Yeah. Because we're in the realm of subjective truth claims. So the question then is, are religious beliefs just subjective truth claims? And there are experiences in the religious experience that are subjective, but the fundamental claims of Christianity, and I think this is true of other major religions as well, but the fundamental claims of Christianity are not subjective truth claims. You can't read Scripture and come to conclusion. The whole thing is anchored on the resurrection. Paul, who is like the biggest propagator of Christianity in the first century, literally says in one of his letters, if the resurrection didn't happen, that is to say, the literal raising from the dead, or the resurrection of Jesus, conquering death, tomb empty, appearing to people, if that didn't happen, everything's futile.
Yeah.
like give up on the whole operation. So what Paul did and what Jesus was doing, and just the very nature of the incarnation, like God incarnating on planet Earth, it moves the whole thing from subjective experiences, and those are part of it, but into, it forces the hand of everyone to wrestle with it as an objective truth. Did it happen or not? Is Jesus, did he resurrect from the grave or not? It's radical, and it's convicting, and it's convicting for Christians, because sometimes we want to live even our Christian life as if it's kind of like quasi just my own sort of personal experience. And I think there's parts of it that is that. And I get that we want to, and I want to respect and acknowledge other people's experiences, and that what their experience of the world and beauty and art is for them, it's unique to them than me. But when we're talking about Jesus as God, the fundamental claim we started with, I'm the way, truth, life, no one gets the Father except through me, we're not in that point in the realm of subjective truth claims. And that's confronting. That's confronting for all of us.
And so I want to just push into this before we dive into our last question, because I want to be mindful of your time. We're both followers of Jesus. I don't think that's like a secret, or we're tricking anybody with that. Everybody knows. It's pretty obvious we're both followers of Jesus. So to kind of just pedal back to what you were saying before, early in our conversation, about how some religious ideas can be very dangerous, and they're ideas that we wouldn't actually be like, yeah, these are things that we should accept and say are okay. I know that some people would push back and be like, yeah, and one of those ideas I would put forward as being dangerous is Christianity, and especially the Bible. And like, I don't know, you could just sit down and read the book of Judges, and it makes you go like, oh, I don't know what to do with this. Or even for some people, like Christianity's view of LGBTQ plus issues is like, yeah, that's a dangerous idea. And so how do you, as a follower of Jesus, reconcile things like the book of Judges, where there's lots of violence in the Old Testament, and it seems like in reading it at just its face value, it seems like there's some sort of like ethnic cleansing, where it's like, oh, go and kill all the Canaanites, and it's like, oh, well, that doesn't sound very good. And then for some people too, the struggle with some of the things that Paul says in the New Testament about homosexuality and gay marriage, like that to a lot of people is a offensive and dangerous belief, and has been used to do, I think even we would agree, really horrible and offensive things. Even people have taken scriptures on women and done horrible things with them that we would say are unbiblical.
Or even the language around slavery in the New Testament,
100%.
which was radically, okay, first of all, the slave system in the New Testament was fundamentally different than the slave system we see at hand today, or in the 1800s in the UK and North America. Fundamentally different slave system. And what Paul was doing was radically subverting it. But then people have used that. Let me just say this, and I hear your question, I don't want to miss it, but let me just say this as an aside. I think it's important to say, evil people or self-motivated people will use anything to achieve their ends.
Yeah.
I think it was Orwell, whether it was Animal Farm or whatever, like, or 1984, like the idea of religion as the opiate to the masses. I don't know if that's someone else that said that, if that was like Nietzsche or Freud, but I know in Animal Farm, the big idea that Orwell's getting at is like, they realize that they can use religion to get power over the people. And that was, I would assume, was a critique of Christianity in America, or, in the Western world. And I've seen people use Christianity to make a profit, to get voted into office, to control a power dynamic in their marriage that's not healthy. And one of my friends would call himself like maybe Darwinian, or like a naturalist, and his worldview would be anchored in a non-theist worldview driven by natural selection. And listen, Darwinian thought has been used for all kinds of evils, eugenics, for example. But it's not fair for me to evaluate the idea itself on its misuses. And I think I owe that to my Muslim friends
Yeah.
and my atheist friends, to not just cite some extreme examples and say your religion did that.
Mm-hmm.
I owe it to them to listen well and understand and see them as a unique person and the outworking of their religious convictions in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't, there's so many atrocious things been done in the name of atheism, secularism, Marxism, Christianity, Islam.
Yeah.
And there are religious wars happening around the world. So what do? Do we judge the integrity of religious ideas and religions by their extreme misuses? Or is there a better way to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I would love to invite people with Christianity to do is first and foremost, look at the central figure, the life of Jesus, and see his life. And when Christians don't live like Christ, they're deviating from the whole point.
Yeah.
And what you see with Jesus is self-sacrificing love that lays down his life for others. And that is the call on Christians. And Jesus taught enemy love. And this is why I have found in Christianity, I really believe an antidote to the chaos, in the sense that it doesn't deny that the nature of truth is mutually exclusive ideas. It doesn't try to relegate religious thought to the realm of just trite subjective experiences, but acknowledge that these are really significant ideas we're wrestling with that really matter and shape the individual who's interacting with them. At the same time, you see him again and again and again practicing enemy love. So the people who were against him, not just believe differently than him, like fundamentally were trying to take him down. He laid down his life for them. He didn't retaliate. One of his disciples one time tried to protect Jesus from a Roman guard with a sword. Yeah. And Jesus said, "Put away your sword, Peter." And Jesus actually, even because Peter in the process had damaged the side of the face of the individual, and it records Jesus putting his hand on his face and healing him. And I'm just so struck by that. And you asked a question, by the way, about Old Testament. That's a massive question. I think that the Bible's been handled very poorly. It's not a simple book. It's a profound book. It's a powerful book. I believe it is God's book, and it's the place that we wrestle with the living God. It's not a simple book. It was written over a number of years in different genres, recording different aspects of history and poetry. And so I think it has to be handled thoughtfully and carefully. And I have found resources like the Bible Project extremely helpful. I think we have to take each book one at a time. And I think that in the book, that in Everyday Apologetics, there's a chapter on the Bible and how to read it. There's many books that have come out, and I just think it has to be done carefully and thoughtfully. And we shouldn't just throw around the Bible casually, because it's not a casual book. And I think that we need to really wrestle with the claims made about sexuality, the claims made about but what's right and wrong, morals and ethics in the New Testament. And then we have to talk about them seriously, because the Bible talks about them seriously, and wrestle with them. What is the Bible saying? What could that mean in our world today? But then also, how did Jesus act in light of those? So for example, one of the sexual ethics in the New Testament is around monogamy, sex being in the context of marriage. So you have to reconcile that teaching with Jesus, who was not just kind to prostitutes, but they were compelled by him. Yeah. They were drawn to him. And so we have to reconcile this. And so the Bible's not simple. And it does have ethics. And that's we don't like the idea of it having a moral ethic that we're supposed to be actually held accountable by. We don't like that as Canadians, but that is the nature of the scriptures. But we also have to acknowledge that in the midst of that, Jesus was the kind of person who wasn't afraid to have convictions about what is right and wrong. That didn't stop him from being a radical extension of love towards those who didn't live up to those ethical standards. And that's the only hope for me, is I don't live up to the ethical standards. I want to. Yeah. I want to submit my life to the ethical standards of Jesus, but I constantly fall short. And I think Christians fall into error where we become arrogant and cocky, as if we're not the ones being extended grace to by the kindness of Jesus. I'm the prostitute. That's me in the story. I'm not Jesus being kind to prostitutes. I'm the one who's a recipient of God's grace. And so that kind of posture has to animate all of our experiences with people.
Yeah. And for those who are struggling with it too, I'll say this. I don't know if Jason would agree, because some people aren't going to like what I'm going to say, but I've come to find this more and more true. And it makes people who are more conservative or fundamentalist get really nervous. And I get why, because I used to be there, but I think it's more and more true that if you're someone who right now is really wrestling with the things the Bible says, specifically in some of those things I mentioned, or even with what Christians have done with Jesus, I just want to say, don't let that cloud Jesus, in the sense of our ultimate hope. And we've gotten this wrong a lot in history. Our ultimate hope isn't in these stories in this book. It's in a historical event that we believe happened, and dive into that. Because if Jesus is true, then you can start to unravel and go, okay, well, these are his followers. Let's read and let's now wrestle with that. But as you wrestle with that, don't just throw, I've seen people throw the baby out with the bathwater, where if you're struggling with this, it's just I don't believe in any of this. And I was like, listen, I get it. And I'm not saying the Bible's not important. I'm not saying that I personally believe it is true, but I don't believe the Bible's true because of the Bible. I believe the Bible's true because of Jesus and who he is and what he did. And so don't let these hesitations just make you write off Jesus. Wrestle with Jesus first, and then start to wrestle with these things and have them roll out. Because I think that's just more helpful and makes it easier. Because even with the Bible Project, or guys like Bruxy Cavey or N.T. Wright or Scott McKnight, they're constantly being Jesus totally changes and transforms the way we see life, the universe, and the Bible. And now we read it through the story of Jesus, and it gives it a different appearance, and it gives life a different meaning. And really wrestle with who Jesus is and what he said, and whether he rose again from the dead, because that changes everything. And then we'll dive into those things. And I know that makes some people uncomfortable who grew up in church, because you're like, oh no, are you saying throughout the Bible? I was like, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that our hope isn't in this book. Our hope is in who the book is pointing to. And I want to encourage those who are struggling with it just to dive into it. But last question for you, Jason, before I let you go. We both obviously are followers of Jesus. We believe Jesus is true. We believe the Bible. It's totally transformed our lives, and we've both kind of dedicated our lives to it. And so I just want to ask you, what makes Jesus true? Why have you found that he is the truth, the life? Why is he different to you than all the other exclusive claims? What has done that for you to make you think, yeah, I think this Jesus guy and what he did and what he said and who he was is actually that he's true, he's God, and he's the one I want to give my life to?
I think that oftentimes people come to relationship with Jesus through sometimes experiences. I know for me, I had a really profound, and I hear the listener going, now, are you talking about subjective experiences? Yeah, personal subjective experiences of experiencing the love of God in my life through Jesus, and then now following Jesus for, I guess, 18 years meaningfully, or almost 20 years meaningfully, continuing to have seen the effect of that in my life, and then seeing people come to know Jesus and the transformation of their life, seeing the effect of Christianity over history and the radical changes made. But ultimately, all of the subjective experience in my life, they don't get me through the moments of doubt. For me, I have to find everything tethered to the reality of the resurrection. And that's what the New Testament is asking us to do, is to wrestle with the idea that, did Jesus rise from the dead? And were those first disciples who gave their lives in support of that claim? And you see evidence in their life that you have to wrestle with, what happened in their lives. Even Paul, what happened to this person who's rising the ranks of Judaism? What kind of encounter did he have that so radically changed his life? And you see that all through the centuries. And so I think it's rooted in the resurrection, and it's informed by the effect it's had on millions of people's lives throughout the centuries. And then I find all these dynamic expressions of it in my life. And I'm on this radical journey in the context of a community, of a local church, and friendships and relationships where I see it outworking. And obviously a much bigger conversation to have. Are you having anyone jump on this podcast to talk about the resurrection? Are you doing an episode on that?
Yeah, eventually it's coming.
Yeah. So can I just footnote that episode?
Yeah.
And point towards there. And I can tell you a few guys that would be great at it. Can I just say two things before we hang up?
Yeah.
And they're not profound, serious things. First of all, it's terrifying having some of these conversations like in real time. I'm like thinking to myself, is he going to edit this? You know, I'm like looking back when I said, I'm like, anyways, it's just the internet's a crazy thing. This is just going to exist out there. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
And that leads me to my second thing, which amplifies it, is for some reason I got up at 3 a.m. after like 3.5 hours of sleep. And I wasn't able to get back to sleep. And so I'm like now trying to, as we talk, I'm like trying to audit what I've said to you. And so I just submit to listeners, you know, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night because I'm thinking, I think he asked a bunch of questions that I didn't answer. I just sort of went on tangents. I'm doing my best here, but anyways, it's been so fun to chat with you, buddy. I really appreciate it. I think these conversations matter a ton. And I really admire that you are hosting a forum for them. And so thanks for what you're doing, man. I think it's really important.
Yeah, thanks, man. That means a lot. Yeah, it's been tons of fun. And thanks again for coming on here. I think you did answer my questions, and I think it's going to be really helpful to a lot of people. So I appreciate you doing this on only like 3 hours of sleep.
Dude,
yeah, this has been so good.
So much fun.